I want to hear from like true Clemson fans because I can't imagine what your feeling or expectation is going into next year. Is it 8-4, 7-5? Are you almost looking at this without the tiger claw and the history that goes into Clemson and just taking that out? Like it's so weird because it's almost like if Nick Saban completely fell off the cliff. Where does Clemson go from here? Truthfully, that's the question. When you go and close the chapter in 2025, you reflect and you think and you say, man, we entered 2025 with national championship aspirations. And there was an asterisk there, not for the fact of whether or not they could contend for national championship contention. I don't know why I had to repeat myself there. It wasn't about whether or not they could compete for it. It was, is this going to be the only window that we have? Because you were number one in returning production. You brought back your quarterback, Cade Klubnik, former 5-star, a guy that seemed like he was finally putting it all together in what could have been an incredible 2025 season. You have an incredible amount of wide receiver talent. The offensive line was something that people really didn't talk about in detail, but kind of assumed, yeah, there's some guys that are going to pop up on the PFF mock draft simulator, and you're going to say, yeah, they have a good offensive line. But the defense is where I really sunk my teeth into and said, yeah, this team's going to be very, very difficult to beat. You have Peter Woods, former 5-star defensive tackle, going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. Same could be said for TJ Parker. Then you had Sammy Brown at linebacker, Avion Terrell, all these different pieces on a defense that not only was very talented, but you had cohesion. You had a high amount of snaps played, a lot of veteran talent. You can have NFL talent on your roster, but are they NFL ready? And I felt like this roster as a whole was NFL ready. So many guys were going to get drafted to go in play on Sundays. And that's going to be the same case in 2026, even with the results that had happened. And what clearly went wrong was the miscalculation or evaluation of the current talent that's on the roster. One of the, I would argue the best defender on that team ended up being, funny enough, a transfer. And if you know the history and the frustration from Dabo Swinney from using the transfer portal, you could see the irony on a guy like Will Helt from Purdue being the most impactful transfer on this entire team. I think you can point to Cade Klubnik as a guy that really struggled with the pairing of Garrett Riley. They obviously let him go after this season. It was just an oil and water situation. You saw a lot of times the best moments from Cade were out of structure, not really within the confines of what Garrett Riley wanted to run. You throw in the fact that the running back position was never figured out. The offensive line was clearly overrated. And then with the change of the defensive coordinator, the defense never really gelled together. And it was a miscalculation or misevaluation across the board. We don't need to revisit every little bit of what went wrong with Clemson. But we see the 7-6. You don't have a quarterback. You have all the pieces that we talked about that are going to be playing for the NFL gone. You are now in your third straight season with 4+ losses. And I understand what people will say. They will say, you know, in 2024, they won the ACC. They got to the college football playoff. You know, I don't know if that is as impressive as the cover letter looks. The content of the book is not as impressive as what the title says. You know, this is now back-to-back years where we're seeing 4+ loss teams winning the ACC. I mean, hell, Duke at 8-5 was able to win the ACC. So how impressive is that feat truly? Even though winning a conference championship, if someone was to tell you, yeah, this team won a conference championship, that's impressive. Is it at this point? Especially for that conference at this point? It's to be seen. But you go into next year, and to reiterate the point I said before, the window. The way that Clemson has been constructed and Dabo has tried to build up this team by not leaning into the portal. And yes, you'll see people reiterate or like rebuttal this and say, yeah, he uses the portal. You just mentioned will help portal edition. He uses it. Yeah, just because you dip your toes into the water doesn't mean you could go and tell me you swam. And the truth is, Clemson still dips their toes into the water, but really doesn't use it to put the roster over the top or to avoid the deficiencies across the board, because they still rely on development. And when your development is flawed, your process is flawed, your results are not going to be what the standard is at Clemson. And frankly, I don't know what the standard is at Clemson anymore. It's not national championships. We're so far away from them winning national championships. The landscape of the sport has changed so much where you cannot tell me any of the processes that Dabo Swinney had when he was at eye level with Nick Saban that they are going to be able to get back to the mountaintop. So is the standard just being a first round out in the college football playoff, hoping you could get to 9 wins? I think that could be a fair argument. I think you could make a fair discussion point on just saying, maybe that's what Clemson is now. That Clemson is not a team that we could just sit here and try to have these conversations of, I don't know, they could be in national championship contention. Maybe they have to earn that respect once again. Now, I understand Dabo Swinney doesn't need the respect of me, you, or anybody else, and he will tell you that. I'm not coming from the perspective to attack the man, especially knowing how he has had to dealt with the portal over the past couple of weeks, getting just ripped to shreds. You know, he went in kicking and screaming, trying to not use the portal. And the moment that he does and tries to elevate his roster to bring in the right people into the building, oh yeah, we're just going to have Pete Golding tamper blatantly and more than likely have no repercussions for his actions, which he'll tell you. I've talked about this before on my TikTok, and I think it's right now something that if you end up watching this video, I want to hear from like true Clemson fans, because I can't imagine what your feeling or expectation is going into next year. Is it 8-4, 7-5? Are you almost looking at this without the tiger claw and the history that goes into Clemson and just taking that out? Like it's so weird, because it's almost like if Nick Saban completely fell off the cliff. It's so different with Alabama because you try to hold him up to these crazy standards, but Nick Saban's not in the building. It's different for Clemson. The guy that got you to the mountaintop is still right there. He's still leading the charge. He's still running down that hill. He's still doing all the same things that he did before. But then you can't really look at him and say, can we make a change? Can we switch things up? And I'm left with more questions than I do answers when talking about Clemson. And I don't know where to go. And frankly, I don't know what the direction or the identity of this team is anymore, outside of Dabo Swinney continuously showing himself as a guy that is more than likely going to retire because of the landscape of where college football is. And that's heartbreaking.